Hey guys, this is Stewie from Cloud9.
Okay, this is another episode of Esports Mount Rushmore. I'm here with the man that you call YNK, I call Janko, and he calls me whenever he's free. I don't know why, that sounded better when I was saying it than actually if you examine it. Also, if you notice, as is the usual staple of all caster-related humour, the joke is essentially that we're all gay, as far as I can tell. Like, that's the only joke involved with it all, right?
No one told me about that one.
Okay, maybe you just thought everyone was really friendly, Janko. I don't know what casting's been like for you.
Especially Jason, for some reason, he's super friendly.
He is a very friendly guy, isn't he? Likes to give out hugs. Gives out great hugs.
And likes to get creamed as well.
Enough said about that. Okay, so on this episode, obviously YNK is someone who's watched a lot of Counter-Strike Global Offensive, and I don't think I haven't actually done a CSGO one yet. I did CS Source, I know, with Vendetta. So for this one, in general, since it's just CSGO, if you want, you can just do the original premise of the show, which is just your 4 most iconic players. Or have you gone with a particular theme? Because I leave it open, so people can go anywhere they want. So have we got a general theme that we're going with here?
I mean, for me, it's really tricky. It's kind of like, you could just pick the 4 players who maybe had the most, like the 4-star players, right?
Sure.
But for me, it should kind of be a bit more than that. Like, maybe players who left an impact, not specifically just outside of the game, but not just in terms of like stats and performance on the server, right? So I'm gonna try and do a bit of both. I mean, pick people who are known for both, and perhaps at the end just give a few, a couple of honorable mentions.
Okay.
Something like that.
Hedging your bets. Okay, I see how it is.
You know me, Duncan, and my predictions. I always hedge my bets. It's always like that. So
who's the first one then?
Like in no particular order, I'd have to
just tell us the first one first, yeah.
Fallen.
Okay.
Fallen.
So I mean that obviously it fits both your criteria, but what's the first thing that makes him leap off the page to you? Why Fallen?
For me, Fallen because like he's able to in-game lead and op at an extremely high level, and I've tried to do that at a point in my career, and it was extremely difficult to focus on both, because as an opper, naturally you have to be super focused on your crosshair, right? It's only like a split second that if you're too late with your reflexes, you get killed by the enemy opper or entry fragger or whatever. So you need to be extremely focused on your own game. But as an in-game leader, naturally, you have to think about what's going on in the round, what are your teammates doing, what are their positions, the calls that they're making, and try to use all of that information to make the best possible call. And, you look at SK and Luminosity before as a team, they always had, like, good team play. I mean, most of the time, right? They had good T sides, good CT sides. They would have good mid-round decisions. So a lot of the things that Fallen was doing, he was probably the best in the world at doing it. And then you look at his individual performance, he was the second best player in the world for 2016. So to have such a high level in both of those aspects, that's like what comes to my mind first. But then after that, you also look at some of the other stuff, like him, how he basically formed the Brazilian scene by himself to an extent. I mean, you know this better than I. At the beginning of the game, he wasn't even willing to switch from 1.6. He had Games Academy, but he was still doing like 1.6 lessons for the Brazilians, right? And then gradually, as the game got updated, patched, he slowly started switching over. Then it was like Kaboom and Keystars, those first initial teams that they, attended, I think, GSWC, something like that, but not having much impact. And then after that, gradually attending international events, having a couple of best-of-1 upsets, but most notably being able to make playoffs at the majors, securing legend status for themselves, and after that being able to build upon that, right? We all know the story of how, thanks to Flasha and other people like from in the scene, the viewers who donated to them, they were streaming to get the funds to be able to go to Katowice, the major, and then in 2015. So after that, they were able to move to North America, leave their, friends, family behind, and focus solely on CS. And you also look at what he's doing right now. He also brought a second team, the now Immortals team, former Tempo Storm. They were like a Games Academy team that won a tournament, and the prize was they get to move to NA and practice there for a couple of months and try their luck at competing with the best. Now they're one of the better teams in the world as well. You look at what he's doing in terms of creating content, mostly for Portuguese-speaking people, mostly for Brazilians, but he did do a couple of features with in English as well, and I think whoever watched that was able to see, how much you can learn and how much he knows about basically everything that comes to also individual play styles and also how to react as a team. So I think with all those things combined, it would be almost impossible to kind of leave Fallen out when you talk about players who left, a big mark so far in the CSGO scene.
So people have to realize with Fallen, because remember, whenever a game has got as big as CS has and kind of so rapidly, you have to always be aware that a lot of the fans probably came around in 2016 or maybe they came around late 2015. So they won't actually remember the first teams that you're referencing here, the Kaboom, Keyd Stars. And so up until they removed the guy called ZQK, who was the AWPer at the time, Fallen wasn't the AWPer. And in fact, in his team, no one even looked at him as a star, because I remember that was the first thing that made me look at his teams was because I knew his 1.6 background. And at 1.6, he wasn't an in-game leader. He was just the star AWPer. And so when I first heard that he's coming back to CSGO and he's playing, it's a bit like when I heard that like CyberZen had formed and they had Savage. Right? I'm thinking to myself, right, this team's probably never going to be good, but let's hope at least that guy's really good and maybe, he hard carries them or something. And I remember watching the early games and being like, okay, that's not happening at all, actually. It looks like Fallen, to be honest. Maybe he's one of those people who's like a victim of the transition to CSGO. And to be fair, it looked like he sucked individually. Like he did it. He was a good individual in-game leader. We got that on board, and everyone started to praise him for how the teams played. But it's kind of shocking, isn't it, that it's not until he switched back to being the primary AWPer that suddenly became, like you said, in 2016, amazing.
Yeah, and you also saw when ZQK was the AWPer, he was also the in-game leader of the team, and their playstyle on the T side was absolutely horrible. It was super slow. It was waiting for ZQK to make a pick with the AWP, but if that doesn't happen, they just seemed lost on their T sides. And Fallen was someone who didn't want to play the game that way. They were kind of the first team that really introduced change of pace on their T side in general within the game. You had very explosive teams like Fnatic and your LDLC, Envious at the time, right? The dominating teams, NIP before that, who really just had that one gear most of the time, right? But it was when the likes of SK at first, Luminosity, you saw it with them trying to do it initially. They didn't have much success. They were still improving as a team, but you saw the idea behind it. And then when they became the dominant team, the best team in the world, that's when you saw why it works so well. Why is it so difficult to play against them? And I agree. I remember like in 1.6 towards the end, Fallen was like a very, he was the AWPer that we saw in 2016 in CSGO. So, a lot of people were wondering, why isn't he playing with the AWP? Similar to what, when I look at Markelov, I want him to be like Fallen. I want at some point Markelov goes back to the AWP and he becomes this amazing AWPer that we all knew in 1.6. So doesn't seem like it's going to happen with Markelov, unfortunately, but it is what happened with Fallen. He's one of those in-game leaders / AWPers who don't fall into the trap of, I'm going to make everything about me. He moves his players, on the map. But if he sees a gap, if he sees an opening for himself, but he's fairly sure that he can get that kill or get that opening frag, he is going to say, okay, guys, just like throw this smoke for me or this flash, I'm going to run out and I'm going to get the first kill and then you guys can react. But it's never like, you all just stand still and I'm going to try and do something, and if I do something, then we can win the round. If not, we're just screwed. So very, very impressed by how he manages to juggle both of those things, or how he did do it throughout 2016 at least.
Do you think that, if anyone, from what we saw of him AWPing last year, if you knew that someone could AWP like that, a lot of teams would make that guy the star player. In some senses, because of the impact he had, he was kind of one of the star players. But the way he actually used his AWP within the system, it's pretty different how you'd use most AWPers, right?
Yeah, to an extent. I mean, I think he realizes very well like what's going on in the game, in a sense of not just like in the game of Counter-Strike, but in a particular game they're playing, meaning that he understands when he's the one who needs to make plays for his team. If some of the other players aren't having a really good game, if maybe Taco is struggling entry fragging, or Cold Zero is having a bit of a quiet game, he realizes that that's when he probably needs to step up and be more aggressive with the op. But generally speaking, he doesn't try to win his team the game by him making the plays. He realizes when he needs to try and do so, otherwise they're just going to lose the game. And another great thing about Fallen as an opera is the change of pace applies to the CT side as well, and being more aggressive with the AWP, like something that we see on Train at times towards upper ramp on B or Ivy, even though Cold Zero does it more when it comes to Ivy. Things like that. Some operas are really good, but they are pretty one-dimensional, and then it's not as difficult to play against them because you can either predict where they're going to be or you know their play style, so you can use your utility to negate their influence. Against Fallen, that's very difficult to do because he doesn't have as many patterns as some of the other guys, and on top of that, he has amazing reaction time. He's very good both close and long range. You look at some of his highlight reels from Overpass when he plays towards the A bomb site or around the toilets area. Most of, when you look at some other opera, would say, wow, this guy really got caught off guard. He's really off position. He shouldn't be here. But with Fallen, you're like, yeah, it's Fallen. He's going to get at least 2. So all those things combined really make him an outstanding opera and an invaluable asset for his team.
And as a tactician, like as the in-game leader, one of the things that I think has been very interesting about his approach is that I was thinking about this the other day, when I was doing that list that was like the top players to never win the major, There's a lot of in-game leaders on there. And in fact, actually, I was thinking to myself, in general, being the really good tactical in-game leader probably doesn't even suit you to be in the best team in the world. Because usually the best tactical teams, you don't want to have all the stars, You want to have like kind of a balance. And then you'd probably need it to be like your best day in terms of everyone playing well to win. So oftentimes the really good tactical leaders, like the guy who's in like the third or the fourth best team, and crucially, he can't really upgrade himself to the next best team. Those tend to just stay in their teams for a long time. So for an example, sure, Pronax has all the majors, but personally, I even said this back in the day, I've always considered Zeus a better in-game leader than Pronax in terms of pure tactical leading. Personally, I value him higher. I think he's better in that respect, even if his team didn't win. So with Fallen, it feels very unique in as much as almost everyone I know did kind of hail him as the best in-game leader, but he was also on the best team, So was there something particularly effective that he figured out in that team, do you think?
I think, again, it comes down to the change of pace more than anything else, right? Because in that sense, SK and Luminosity was extremely difficult to play against. Not just that they had great individual players, but they were very hard to read, very difficult to counter them. As well, like when it comes to the Fnatic lineup with Pronax, he always said that he found it extremely hard to play against Existence and the Titan team because he felt that Existence could always get a good read on him, and he, was unsure in his calling when he played against Titan, even though at some point, Titan was like barely a top 10 team and Fnatic was the best team in the world. With SK, with the Brazilian team, it was always difficult to, at least like when they really became good, when they got Taco and FNX late 2015, they were really difficult to read. You could know what they were going to do. You could know that perhaps they're going to go for a fast strat at some point, or then they're going to slow it down, but you couldn't really pinpoint when. And it's always difficult. Ideally, if a team is playing like fast-paced Counter-Strike, you would use your utility early. That way, it would be easier to fight that style. If they play super slow, then you're going to save your utility, like what we saw from teams playing against Navi. Against SK, it was really difficult to do either because, at times when they figured out that you were using your utility early, they would just slow the game down. And on top of having good like tactical foundation, they also eventually got a lot of confidence. They have very skilled individual players. I think what's very important in their rise, and we see that for more teams now, but from then initially everyone was willing to sacrifice like stats and individual performance for the team. Like Taco was one of the first guys who was willing to just run out literally in some executes with his knife out to just, make sure that his team gains ground coming into the bomb side, that they get the trades, plant the bomb, and put themselves in a good position to win the round. And that selfless style of play that we saw from everyone within the team is what made them, capable of becoming the best team in the world. Fur is another good example, right? When Coldzera took over as the star player of the team, he had no problem taking, a step back, having a bit of a different role, being more aggressive on the CT side. FNX as well. They just had all the ingredients to be a great team. And the most important thing, they were all on the same page when it comes to what needed to be done for them to become the best team. The dedication was there, the hard work was there. They were really a unit, and that's what made it possible for them to become the best team in the world.
Okay, who's second up on the list then?
The second one up, I have to put Get Right there. Simply because, early on, when we talk about early CSGO, right, when NIP was such a dominant team and all of that, Get Right, the peak that he hit was so insane. You could argue that the rest, the competition wasn't as high, but I mean, it was due to him and the rest of his team just being so much better. And to me, the style of Get Right's play, regardless of his effectiveness throughout the history of CSGO, he's one of those players when people ask me or comment on YouTube or whatever and ask me, who would you point us to watch demos of, or when we want to learn about having good game sense, Get Right would be one of the first players to come to my mind, because the amount of times he was able to outsmart his opponents and win rounds for his team by simply being in a better position at some point in the round is insane. At this point, everyone knows about the 4+1 NIP setup, right? When 4 players were doing something by themselves, being on one side of the map, and you knew that Get Right was on the other side of the map, lurking, trying to get a pick off. And even though people knew it was coming, it was still extremely difficult for them to deal with it. He was still able to be effective. He was still able to have a lot of impact for his team. And for me, just all those things combined really make him someone who's, an iconic player when it comes to CSGO.
Yeah. I mean, the 4+1, obviously not to be confused with Nip's recruitment strategy. We joke, we kid Nip, we love Nip. So, okay. So one of the things, though, when you're saying that about his game sense is, I would definitely agree. One of the things about people who are very good at something is, if you're just an average player, you definitely can always pick up pointers, and try. Sometimes, even if you can't know really why they did something, just the exercise of trying to figure out, what did he go off? What sound cue did he go off? Or what timing was he trying to work off it? Will help a beginning player. But, I mean, Get Right's a good example, though, of someone where this isn't just he learned to play CS and he studied CS and he practiced a lot. There's something extra to this, an intuitive component to the game sense, right? I mean, to give another example, okay, if you watch Nico's crosshair placement in the game, I've no doubt he's drilled lots of hours and he's thought about the game, but there's something extra there that another player won't, no amount of hours will give them this ability, right?
Yeah, definitely. It's just a talent as well, some innate game sense that you have. People need to realize when it comes to tier 1 CS, the highest level of games, the amount of information you have to process is pretty much the same that you do in any Counter-Strike game. But the point is the reaction time that you need to have to be able to react to those things properly and in time is insane. And you have very good players, very good mechanical players who struggle with reacting in time or reacting around the map or making the right decision in a round. Perhaps Nex might be a good example. I was talking to Kassad and he told me Nex is probably the guy that I saw that has the best raw aim, the best crosshair place, and put his crosshair on the opponent's head. He's probably one of the best that he ever saw, if not the best. But his decision making at times, right, holding a bomb site, how is he going to use his utility? How is he going to move around? Is he going to be over aggressive at times? Things like that. That's where he was lacking. And with Get Right, sometimes in a round it's best to just play it safe, buy time. Sometimes you need to take a big risk, be aggressive if you're at a disadvantage. And Getright is one of those players who just seems to always be aware of what's going on in the round, like always making the right decision. Even though if he, just dies, he didn't die because he made a bad decision. He either got outplayed or he just, got out-aimed. But 90% of the time, I think it's safe to say he makes the best possible decision. And that's why, even though NIP isn't as dominant of a team by, even close as they were in 2012, 2013, even through 2014, 2015, Getright was still a very dominant player. It's just that they as a team weren't as dominant as they were before.
Yeah, so one of the interesting things about the fact that he has probably the most well-defined style in CSGO, not least because, he was literally the first big star, and then he basically was the only one who did that really extreme kind of lurking, but then continued it, pretty much up until the period when they got threat, he was just continued to make that style work to differing degrees. But one of the things I always found interesting about it is this is where being an outsider and being a fan, you can't apply what you think is common sense. Okay, so if I was playing against a normal player and he did just go to the same spot of the map every time, and if I ever saw him on that spot, that means his team's on the other side of the map. That's very simple to kind of have a flow chart of like, right, well, I've seen him, so we can trap him and we can trick him and we can know where the team's going. But even though they ran this over and over again, the best example ever is probably when he used to just go to the boiler room on Inferno at the beginning of the round, no matter what, every single time. How did he manage to make it work, though? Because people knew this shit and they couldn't stop it, right?
Yeah, it is pretty insane when you think about it. The thing with Getright is, he goes boiler, but what does he do? Sometimes he just plays super passive and waits for someone to check boiler and gets the kill there. Sometimes he just holds the passive angle from A apps as his team is executing on B, and his only goal is to kill the player who's rotating from pit towards B, right? Sometimes he gets a bit more aggressive and goes out mid and then tries to kill someone on long A, right? So he has these different variations of lurking in his style. The problem is, even though, he became infamous for it, so he didn't really even have to do anything in the server yet, and people would already try to figure out a way to fight him. If it's a player you don't know and you die to his lurk, then you have to be more wary of it. You have to be more careful. He's going to delay the rotations. And even without getting kills, he would have a lot of impact, right? I'm also one of the things that I have to give him praise is that with the addition of Threat in a sense reinvented Getright's game, right? Because people started, it was too obvious eventually. So then they started using Getright as a sort of an entry fragger, right? They would throw a lot of smokes, flashes, and they would send Getright, and people would think, oh, it's just a fake, the rest of the team is on the other side. But in fact, the rest of the team would be behind, and he was actually very proficient in that role that they kind of, a secondary role for him that they would use at times. It's one of the things that made them such a great team early last year that enabled them to win DreamHack Masters Malmo and so forth. So I think for a lot of the players, maybe besides VP, who changes their roles as well, a lot of these more experienced players who are established as personalities as well, they would find it very difficult to switch to a different style of play. We're like, nah, just let me do my own thing. Maybe Hiko is a good example, right? In NA, he was touted as the NA version of Getright, and he was extremely good at that role as well. But he is someone who is a bit reluctant to switch his role to accommodate the team more. So Getright has shown flexibility in that regard as well.
Yeah, and obviously, the period you're pointing to was a very specific period. It's exactly the period when Nip was very good on cash, because this was one of the most notable maps that he was doing on when he was always over at the A site. So this is something that you have to talk about when it's Get Right, which is with all these other players, okay, first of all, there weren't many names that really did as hardcore lurking as he did. There was Hiko, Happy eventually, came along and started doing that. But aside from that, kind of what I said in the last question, the whole point is when people really do know you're going to do that every single round, then they can even pick up basic info on where your team are based on where they see you. So you have to be insanely good to make it work. And the fact that even Get Right eventually kind of couldn't make it work as well, or it didn't work as well in his team, Does that tell us that you just can't do that anymore? Like, do you have, if you're going to be a lurker kick, you definitely can still be that role. Do you have to do more of like the pressure lurk, or more of like every now and then you're just the fake and you go fully into the site? Does there have to be a balance now? What do you think? Can it ever go back to the old style?
I don't think so. I think right now it shows you that you need to have variety. You can't be one-dimensional. It goes back to why SK became so good and why Fallen was like a really good tactician, because he introduced that for the team as a whole, right? So that the team was always switching things up. The same thing applies for a lurker. You can't always play the same style. I mean, you look at Happy, for example, right? His style of lurking is extremely, extremely passive. Like, he's the type of a lurker that if his team gets into the site, if they get the good trade that put the bomb down, he is probably going to secure the round for his team with a very, very passive, like, backstab. But on the other hand, if his team doesn't, like, manage to initially get into the site, or if they get into the site but are in a situation like a 2v4 or a 3v4, then he's, like, in no position to help his team with, like, he's just too far behind. He can't even be aggressive at that point in time. So you need to be able to do both, in a sense, so that way your opponents can't really say, oh yeah, we know that, I don't know who I was talking to. I think it was one of the North guys. When they were playing Cobble against Envy, they would just have a player, no matter what, watch like the window in drop, because that's like where eventually Happy is going to come, right? Doesn't matter like how many people died, how many, what's going on in the round. One person was just always supposed to hold that one position. And when it becomes that obvious, when it really comes to that, you have to change things up.
So not only was GetRight the original star of CSGO, obviously he was in the best team and he was the best player, but I think the only person who I think you could legitimately say has been as good for as long is probably Shox, because Shox has had his own kind of revivals, from team to team. But even though GetRight's in a slump now, if you look over the years, every time in each of the years, he's had a period where he got back up again. He got to a good level again, or he was just very good for the whole years in some of the past ones, Does the fact that he's kind of dropped off a bit now, is that just individual form? Do you think, like, obviously not every player can be good forever. Do you think he will make the rise up and become an elite player again?
You see, that's what I really wonder, right? I want to believe, like, from watching both Forest and GetRight for a very long time, I want to believe that they are still able to be, one of the best players in the world and really dominate the scene. But I question now whether if we had a proper Swedish shuffle and if they were playing in a completely new team, would that give them motivation? Would that reinvigorate them? And would they be able to be, one of the more dominant players in the scene? Or is this just, I always thought that for NIP, most of the time in the past 2 years or so, it wasn't like any individual player really being the biggest problem. I always thought it was the style of the team as a whole that was outdated, so to speak. So at this point, after 2016, you do begin, and especially after the last couple of months, for GetRight, he had those very, very miserable performances that you wouldn't really expect from him. The major qualifier as well. You are starting to be, you are beginning to wonder slightly. Is it, did they fall off, or did he fall off? Is he able to come back to that level of play? So I'm not really sure. I would like to believe so. I'd like to believe that he can still bounce back from that and that NIP can still be a very, very good team. I am very curious to see how they will play with Drake now. That's, a dedicated opper and all of that stuff. So I want to say yes, that I do believe that he can still come back and be a dominant force within the scene.
Because one of the things that worries me in GetRight's case in particular, okay, in Forrest's case, it's not even a stereotype or a meme. He literally has had periods in his career where he just lacked motivation. And so he played the scrims and he played the official matches, but he wasn't the guy putting in the DM hours. He wasn't the guy trying to revent his game and retool it and watch demos of himself. He just wasn't the guy doing that, because he's always lived and died by this incredible inherent skill he has as a player. Forrest is a natural at games. And so for him, if he goes up and down and wavers, I can get it to a degree. Like you maybe can say, okay, give him a few months. He'll get it back and then he'll come back in again. The problem I have for GetRight is, I think GetRight, of all the players I've known in esports, except for people who are like Korean StarCraft players who, really did go to an extreme of how much they practiced, GetRight might be the most dedicated esports competitor I've ever met. Like, this is a guy where even when he's on top, he would, like, he'd have it in his mind, like, I've got to do these extra hours of DM and I've got to, like, watch a demo of the upcoming. Like, he would go to ridiculous degrees. So the problem is when someone like that falls off, you can't really say, like, oh, he's just not motivated, he's not doing the hours, because I'd bet he is. So I have a question for you. I wanted to just see what you thought of this. So I did a video recently where a way I kind of speculated is at the moment everyone thinks about NIP and they just think about them in terms of everything we know about NIP. So they think, right, well, can Get Right and Forest be in the team means can they be good enough stars? Can Freiburg be in the team means can he be a good enough entry fragger? So what I tried to think was, is there a way you could have NIP, and obviously you don't want to get rid of Get Right and Forest, so could you just kind of shuffle them around a bit? And so I thought to myself, if Get Right really doesn't come back in terms of individual form, but we know he's this guy with fantastic game sense and a very smart player and a very dedicated player. Could he switch to being some kind of a more supportive player and have a different star player in the NIP team? What do you think it could work?
That's a very tough question to answer because you would need to know the person, right? How is he?
Sure.
Does he have too big of an ego to take a step back? It's what we mentioned in the SK thread as well. Those players were all willing to sacrifice themselves for the better of the team. Every player will tell you, I just want to win. Like, I want to win no matter what. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. But that isn't necessarily true when it comes to actually, now I have to be the bitch. I have to be the one like dropping an AK and playing with a Galil or playing with a Tech 9. I have to be the one smoking and flashing people in. It's not fun. Like, even being like the first guy in when you just are going to sacrifice yourself and the rest of the guys are going to clean up, that's not fun. And you need to have a specific mindset to be able to execute that role. Now, personally, I'd like to believe that Get Right can be a sort of a Zipex for NIP, right? That he can be this overqualified support player for the team. Of course, then you have like different questions arise: who's going to lurk then, and what's going to happen with the rest of the team. But we saw that he was able to reinvent himself by being an entry fragger in some situations. Support is a bit different because it sucks even more. So I'm not completely sure, but I'd like to believe that he would be capable of doing that.
Okay, who's number 3?
Who's number 3? For number 3, I'm going to go with Papa Biceps. Papa Biceps.
Controversial pick.
Because of a couple of different things. One, people, like, as you said, some of the newer viewers won't really be able to remember that Pasha was the best player in the world in like the first half of 2014, if not like for the whole year to an extent. So there were periods when he was really like the driving force of Virtus Pro before like it was Snacks and perhaps Bialy, right? So there's that. Also his style of play, like Pasha's style of play is like similar to something that you would say about JW, right? At times it looks really silly, you're thinking like, what's he doing? Like, Pasha, what are you doing? Why is this happening again? But then somehow he makes it work. And why is this important? This is important because when it comes to tier 1 CS, the like psychological aspect is super, super important. It's like 50% of the game, if not even more. So to be able to frustrate your opponents, because, when you die to that, like he isn't supposed to do this. Like, this isn't supposed to work. This doesn't make any sense. And yet he does that and he beats us by doing it. And it was like maybe a super important round and now we're money fucked or whatever. So the psychological aspect that type of a play style has on your opponents is very, very like impactful. But also when you look at VP as a team, because we talk about them like they haven't changed their roster for so long, they've managed to be more or less on the top for the whole time. Sure, they've had their ups and downs, but when you look at it, for the better part of those ups, it's been when Pasha has been playing well. You look at their most recent, like the last 6 months or so, it was like Pasha who started playing almost like the 2014 version of himself, right, to an extent. So I think those reasons, and on top of that, I think it's just his personality, right? When when you look at him, he's just you feel like he's like the most honest person, to an extent. Just like a great guy in general, doesn't really, always means well, always tries to I'm not really sure how to describe this, but his stream is like people like 20, 30,000 people watch his stream. He just has a lot of impact on the community in general. I feel like so for him, it's that part of like as a personality, not solely as a player. Because if you go simply with like who are like the best players and the most impactful players, I don't even think like 10 people would be enough like to make that list.
Okay. So obviously everyone, as you're saying, knows his personality and especially knows his style, because his style is the kind where, yeah, if it works, it's going to look so awesome. I mean, there's also the periods when it doesn't work, like early 2016, and you're just going to be like, I mean, a lot of people were like, cut this guy, like, it can be harsh. But what do you actually think of his skill set? Because I've always thought Pasha is a really great example of how it's not, okay, people outside Counter-Strike naively look at Counter-Strike and they think, right, it's obviously a game just all about aim, and it's about hitting headshots and about having precise aim. And it's like, okay, to give the example you gave before, okay, so Nex has universes better precision aim with an AK than Pasha does. Pasha's the kind of guy who like sprays into the guy's body and just rushes on them like without even stopping. But the difference is you can bank on Pasha to get a lot more kills than Nex will in a game. So what is his actual skill set? Because it is kind of a bit unorthodox in that sense, right?
Yeah, I feel like for Pasha, it's perhaps that expression, a jack of all trades, but a master of none. Okay. Like, he isn't like an insane lurker. He isn't an insane rifler, an insane pistol player, an insane oper, but he can do, a bit of everything, right? And it comes down to whether if he's having like a good game, if his form, like if he's in good form, then he can be like extremely annoying to play against, because he can like pick up the op and switch things up. He can play with a rifle. He can be good with pistols. He can clutch. I think what you said is what describes him the best. He's just unorthodox. You like never know what Pasha is going to do when you're like in a 1v1 against him. You can't know. He's not going to do perhaps the most optimal thing, because you're always trying to be a step. You look at Zipex, right? The way he plays clutch situations, It's all super calculated. He's going for the like highest percentage play that he could possibly go for. And when he plays against players who try to do the same, he's just better at it than them. And that's what enables him to win those clutch rounds. With Pasha, it's not like that. You can't think, oh yeah, this is like the best thing that you can do, so I'm going to wait for him to do exactly that. No, for Pasha, he can just decide to do something completely different and catch you off guard and basically win the round by doing exactly that. So I think for him, really, it is that extremely unorthodox playstyle, which doesn't most of the time it's almost a synonym to being very aggressive, but not always. Sometimes it basically just is, throwing a smoke and then just walking out of the smoke by himself for like you couldn't see a particular reason for that happening, but he just decides to do it, and then it works, and the other team loses all map control because that one player was supposed to look for that, but he saw a smoke and turned somewhere else, and the round falls apart. Things like that. So I don't know, for me, Pasha, just you look at the whole package, right, and his character and all the funny moments we've seen like in and out of the game. I just feel he's someone who has left and still is making a big mark on the scene. That's what I like when I pick the players. That's what I look to, in a sense, who left the biggest mark, not simply within the game but also outside of the game.
So if you looked, okay, at a team like, let's say, the current Astralis team, you could really believe with the different players they have and how versatile they are and how many good fundamental players they have, I could actually believe they did sit down on a map and think, what is the best approach to this map now? And then figure out who in the team was going to do it. But if you look at Virtus Pro, it's pretty clear that is not the way they work. I mean, their approach seems to be the other way around. It's like, well, what can our players do? And then, like, how can we sort of have like a makeshift approach that will work based on that? So, for example, if you put Pasha into like early 2016 Na'Vi, I'm pretty sure his career just ends instantly. Like, he couldn't play in that system, and like very regimented as to what you do and very slow and set up. And so how do they actually accommodate Pasha in Virtus Pro, do you think? How is that able to succeed and so many times have success?
I think it's like, to me, it's pretty apparent that when you look at how they played their T side, right? VP is known as a team that doesn't really rely on any individual making a play to win them the round, right? It's not like Snags get the op and jump out of mid and get 2 kills and then we can win the round. No, it's always like there's always a plan behind it and an execute that comes in. And if a player steps up within the execute, like gets 3 headshots, maybe Bialy or someone, then it just, adds to the round. But it's never just dependent on them. It's always like if everyone does their job properly, we're going to win the round. So you look at it and how they play it. Pasha is rarely alone, right? He's always the part of like at least 2 or 3 players. For example, he's towards Ivy with someone else on T side of Train, trying to get control of that area of the map, being there for the trade. It's Snags who's perhaps by himself on a different area of the map, or Neo, right? The players who know how to play, who have maybe a bit more game sense, who are more aware of what they need to do and how to do it by themselves without dying. With Pasha, it's always like being a part of the pack and being the one who's going to aggress and get into the bomb side perhaps. When it comes to the CT side, you see how initially he was like the guy holding Ivy, for example, on Train as well, the guy holding B-Plat, those areas of the map where there's really a lot of like pressure on that one player to perform, because there's always something happening. Even though the T's aren't gonna go there, they're going to have some presence there, try to get a cheeky kill or throw some nades there to force you out of position. So you saw them switch him on Train from that position. He switched with Neo. Neo is playing Ivy. He's playing Rotator. He's still playing B platform, and that's one of the weaknesses of VP. When Pasha is having a bad time, he's playing these, very important spots on the CT side most of the time, and that's where their weakness then lies. You see them at times struggling with it. So they've tried to, on some maps, switch things up. On other maps, maybe just give him more support. But when he's having a good game, he is capable of locking those important areas of the map pretty much by himself. Maybe not completely locking it down, but doing a good enough job so that his team can secure the round after that.
Okay. Who's going to be our last name then?
This is the most difficult one, right? Because you have the likes of Shocks, right? How can you not mention someone like Shocks, the guy who maybe even has the highest peak out of all the players? You have the likes of Kenny S, who was so dominant in 2014. In general, but in 2014 in particular with the AWP. You have Olofmeister, right? Another very dominant, the best player in the world in 2015, pretty much. But still, with all of that, I'm going to go with Flusha. Flusha, because one, he's one of my favorite players to watch individually, because as I said, for game sense, I would point to perhaps Get Right or Snacks or someone like that. I would do the same for Flusha, but I would point out Flusha first as a player who is probably the best in the world at using like positioning and utility to his advantage, in a sense that he isn't a sick aimer per se. He wins battles by being in a favorable position before the fight even happens, right? Always being a step ahead of his opponents. And he was one of the guys who initially had to do all the dirty work, right? On Inferno, he was supposed to get like banana control by himself on the T side, or like get information without dying, perhaps hold B on cash on the T side, things like that, where he would have a lot of value for his team, like denying control for the CTs, denying the map information, and in turn giving a lot of that information to his own in-game leader. So that's the first thing, that his style of play and how intelligent he is as a player. But there's another like side to it. I also like the fact that he is a bit of a villain, like in the
so his personality as well, then,
yeah, personality as well. The fact that he was always like very, very confident when it came about his team, but also about his individual performances. That's why I always say we need more players to do interviews like Flusha, like Taz, like Crims, people who are honest and who are going to say, yeah, we're just going to crush them, because that's how Fnatic felt in 2015 and in some part of 2016 as well, that they are just going to crush any team that gets on the server. And we always used to say on the desk, when it comes to playing Fnatic, you first need to make them respect you, and then you can actually play CS against them, because otherwise they're just going to run over you all the time. So for Flusha being like that, and even when his team was like had a difficult period or something like that, he was always super confident and super cocky to an extent. At times you could probably say that he was arrogant, but
Yeah.
I mean, it's a style that sometimes you need to adopt to become the best, right? You can't, not everyone can be like Fallen, be Mr. Nice Guy, and still like be the best team in the world. So that aspect as well is something that I think that Flasha has also left like a big mark on the CS:GO scene.
So I remember it was I think it's still, I don't know if it holds to this day, but I know into 2016, the stat still held that Flasher had like the highest rating at all the majors, etc. Obviously, by the way, he had played in every major and he'd been in the playoffs of every major. So that helps, obviously, rather than getting banged out in like 2 games if you're in the last place team. But with that said, that's the interesting detail, isn't it? Is because he's never had the best aim. In fact, for a lot of people, he's never been the best player. He wasn't even the best player in Fnatic. So when he's saying about like his villain nature, and the fact that, he was very confident. I mean, do you think that those two things correlate? Like that's why he's got this insane level of performance at the biggest tournament?
Yeah, I think it just shows you his personality, right? He isn't a guy who's going to crumble under pressure. In contrast, he probably welcomes it, right? And he performs even better in those situations. Like, I just looked up the stat. coldzera is the highest rated player right now at the majors, and even by a large margin. But he has 2 times less maps than Flasha has, and Flasha is the highest rated player. He shares that with Snacks. So you look at the players we've had, the likes of probably like Snacks, Device, Olaf, Shocks. Most of these players you would put them higher than Flasha in terms of like performance or in terms of skill, but he's just been able to be so consistent at the biggest stage that it's something that you really need to respect. That's why I have personally a lot of respect for someone like Edward as well, who has never probably been, perhaps maybe a little bit in Astana Dragons. I don't even think in that team was regarded as like the star player, but he's the highest rated CIS player at the majors as well, which is something that you would never you think of being true. So talking about Flasha's personality and him being a villain, we also need to remember what we mentioned at the beginning with Fallen, that he was the guy who donated his winnings, a couple of €1,000. It was like a local Swedish tournament, something sort of a charity.
Actually, no, it was actually the one that they won against Titan, and all those are good teams.
Oh yeah, so that was So that tournament, and he donated all of his winnings to the Luminosity guys, so they could pay for their travel to Katowice or for the travel to one of the two, so they could attend the event, pretty much. And he is a villain in a sense that he acts like that for his team to be the best, and he's not going to be Mr. Nice Guy when it comes to playing his opponents in a game. But when it comes to doing stuff like that, you can see that he is also like genuinely a great guy, doesn't really hold hard feelings towards anyone, and which is something that really needs to be noted considering all the controversy that we've had surrounding Flasha, right? It's something that amount of pressure and the amount of negativity that surrounds a player, especially when you had certain like other players in tier 1 teams who believed the rumors and thought that he was cheating and all of that stuff, which I personally never thought it to be true, or never thought that there was any truth in it. It's hard for you to, it's easy for you to say, I'm just gonna quit. Fuck this. Why do I need this? Everyone's like hating me. And we know that they were contemplating it as a team with the boost situation at DreamHack, right? But again, it shows you his personality. That he was just like probably fueled by it, and he was like, now I'm gonna show all these like fuckers, I'm gonna dominate them like this whole next year, or I'm gonna try to be the best player in the world. And he had like really great performances throughout 2015, and just in general, he's a great player. So all of these reasons combined really make me like have an incredible amount of respect for him.
So what's rare about Flusher is for a lot of the players who kind of like a lot of the players who were even listing off theirs like highest rating at the majors. Part of the reason you get the highest rating is you've got to be on very good teams a lot, and have stack up a lot of majors to do that. So almost everyone you listed there has been in really really good teams most of their careers. But with Flusher, we got a really unique opportunity to see what happens when they're not in a good team because Godsend obviously was basically a train wreck until the very end. Like they only vaguely got it together by the time the major came around. Before that, they couldn't even qualify for lands. When they did go to lands, they could go to like tier 2 lands and get humiliated, What did you actually think of Flusher's play in Godsend?
Well, I felt like he was the star player of that team, that basically it was down to him and maybe to an extent JW to, make something happen. Otherwise, that team is not going to win a game. Pretty much, and I feel that it's a specific situation when it comes to Godsend because you had the initial shuffle, then another shuffle, and it just felt that the players were in all the iterations of that team, they were very uncomfortable and didn't really enjoy playing with each other that much. And when you have an atmosphere like that within the team, you are going to have bad performances pretty much across the board, right? So I think that when you look at Flusher's career, the time in Godsend is probably, something that you would want to like blank out, to pretend that it didn't happen, simply because you feel like the player, and not just him, but some of the other players, Krims was in that team for a while as well, that they just should be in a much better team and should be like contending at the highest level. It just wasn't possible with the composition that they've had in those teams.
So an interesting detail about Flusher is he actually has flirted a number of times in his career with being an in-game leader in Fnatic lineups, and even when Pronax was there, they did a brief period, and then he came back to Pronax, and then obviously there was the lineup that won like all those tournaments in a row with Dennis. I think actually he was the in-game leader for a bunch of these. Now, and apparently I think he might even have been the in-game leader of the current Fnatic. I'm not certain on that one. I think it was intimated as much. Now, whenever we use these terms, like very tactical team or a very loose team, as far as I can tell, his idea of being an in-game leader is like, forget the word loose, it is loosest. Like, I don't even know what tactics they really have there. What do you think of when he's been in-game leader? Has it worked? Do you understand what he's trying to go for?
I mean, you should probably look at late 2015, early 2016 Fnatic, right? That lineup after Pronax, pretty much, and it was like that. It was looser than loose. I think that they were all on the same page in a sense that we just believe that individual skill beats everything else. And we just need to be able to work off of each other and see who makes a play. And we should all just be able to naturally react to that. Now, you hear me say this and you're thinking maybe, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like, that's pretty simple. Just, I see what my teammate is doing, then I just react to that. Yeah. But that's so extremely difficult to do, like in a game with like limited information, maybe in terms of communication or in terms of you being aware what's going on the map. But they were just able to execute it so well that it was actually incredible how they were able to make that happen. The smallest of like little shoulder picks to bait for your teammate, to wait for someone to come on the flank, the timings for getting map information on the CT side, like flashing someone in, then rotating to the correct bomb site. They were like so good at those like individual plays, individual decision making, mid-round calls, especially on the CT side, like when to be aggressive mid-round. And it was very hard for people to play against that. And it did take a long time for people to adapt. It was the rise of SK and the rise of Navi to an extent that really shut that playstyle down eventually, but they still won like 5 or 6 LAN tournaments in a row. That lineup was top 4 every time besides the Columbus major, pretty much, so they still had very good results. Now, I don't personally think that, you can't really attribute that much to him and his in-game leading. That more comes down to players playing well individually and, the communication being on point, because he didn't really move those players like chess pieces on the board, right, and tell them what to do. He was just like laying out basically making a general layout, and then people were like doing things based off of that and simply reacting to it, right? It was even looser than it was when Pronax was the in-game leader.
Okay, so we've had our 4 names. We had Fallen, Get Right, Papa, Pasha Biceps, and Flusher. Those were the 4, right?
Yeah.
To close the episode out, do you have a final comment on these 4 or the philosophy or anyone else you want to mention?
Yeah, I mean, I picked these players out, as I said a couple of times, because I feel like they left a mark. And you also kind of have to pick players who've been there since the beginning to an extent when you talk about, household names or who've been there for the biggest period of time. Obvious mentions, I would like to use that as well, are the likes of coldzera, who ever since he came onto the scene has been one of the most consistent, dominant performers. I would have to say the same for Device, who, even though Astralis only recently became like a team that's going to win the biggest tournaments, won the major and all of that, he was a very consistent player throughout. Also had to switch from being a rifler to being an AWPer. That's like worth mentioning. The likes of Olofmeister, a guy who was the best player in the world for a very, very long period of time. One of the main reasons why Fnatic was such a dominant team. He kind of changed the meta to an extent by, being very aggressive by himself on maps like Cobble, towards B platform, maps like Train, towards like T mid, like you call that position Olaf even. Yeah. I know a lot of people call it that. The likes of Kenny S for being Kenny S and Shox for both being like very, very flamboyant players who have extremely high skill ceiling. Right, the like of Forest for the very, very similar reasons that I picked Get Right out. And, when you talk more about personalities, you have the likes of Taz and Neo, right, legends of the game, who have managed to to remain like relevant in the CS scene and still win championships after all this time. There are a lot of players, and it was extremely difficult for me to just pick out 4, but in the end, it is just my personal feelings, so that's what I went with. Even the likes of Hiko from NA, because, when you look at that region and like international success, he is the one player who from beginning to end had the most success when it comes to that region, pretty much.
Hi, this is Get Right, and you're watching Torrent's YouTube channel.